Hi everyone, welcome again to the series of lectures on civil procedure. Our topic for today is actually depositions pending action. Okay. So, what is a deposition? It is the testimony of a witness taken in writing under oath before a commissioner, examiner, judicial officer in answer to interrogatories or cross-interrogatories and usually subscribed by the witness. You must remember uh, that deposition is a fact-finding tool. Okay. The pleadings, the complaint, as well as the answer, alleges only basic facts, the ultimate facts. Now, the details of those facts are discoverable through depositions, through modes of discovery under Rule 29 of the Rules of Civil Procedure. The primary function of depositions is to supplement the pleadings for the purpose of disclosing the real points of dispute and afford an adequate factual basis during the preparation for trial. To obtain the fullest possible knowledge of issues and facts before trial to prevent it from being carried on in the dark. Okay, so it is a fact-finding tool. Modes of discoveries are fact-finding tools designed to supplement the pleadings because the pleadings allege only ultimate facts. Now, to prevent the trial from being carried on in the dark and for you to be able to know the facts of your opponent, you can avail of the modes of discovery, consisting of depositions, whether oral or written, request for admission, request for production and inspection of documents, request for the physical or mental examination of persons. Okay. These are fact-finding tools which you can avail of at any stage of the proceedings before judgment. It is ideally it should be after the issues have joined and before pre-trial to aid you for the purpose of determining what facts can be admitted, okay, during the pre-trial stage of the proceedings. However, it does not prevent a party from making use of this fact finding method, okay, when the trial has already commenced, but it should be availed of before judgment. Okay. Depositions pending action. Okay, how do you avail of depositions pending action? Upon ex parte motion of a party, the testimony of any person, whether a party or not, may be taken by deposition upon oral examination or written interrogatories. The attendance of witnesses may be compelled by the use of a subpoena. Okay. So as a general rule, when you want to take the deposition of a witness, okay, whether or not he is a party to the case, you can do so by filing an ex parte motion. So it is a non-litigious motion. Okay, it need not be set for hearing. It can be decided upon by the court upon application without requiring the other party to comment. Except in instances when, okay, the person whom you want to take the deposition is confined in prison. In cases when the deponent is confined in a prison facility, there is a need to seek the approval of the court. So it is only in that instance when, okay, a motion for leave to take the deposition of a person confined in prison is required to be filed. In all other cases, depositions may be taken by filing an ex parte motion. Is there a need to notify the other party? Yes. There is a need to notify the other party to inform him of the date and time of the deposition so that he can be present, so that if he has objections or if he has cross interrogatory questions, he can do so. He can attend and propound the said objections or questions. Okay. Now, what is the scope of examination when you are conducting a deposition? The deponent may be examined regarding any matter not privileged, which is relevant to the subject of the pending action. So, the topic or the issues that may be raised during the deposition taking are those that are relevant to the pending case, but provided that those matters are not privileged information, whether relating to the claim or defense of any other party, including the existence, description, nature, custody, condition, and location of any books, documents, or other tangible things, and the identity and location of persons having knowledge of relevant facts. The taking of depositions should be differentiated from the use of depositions. Does it mean that if you take the deposition of a witness, does that person necessarily becomes your witness? The answer is no. The mere fact that you took the deposition of a person does not make that person your witness to the case. In order for him to be a witness to your case, okay, you have to introduce or you have to use his deposition during the trial. Section 4 tells us that at the trial or upon the hearing of a motion or an interlocutory proceeding, any part or all of the deposition so far as admissible under the rules of evidence may be used against any party who was present or represented at the taking of the deposition or who had due notice, okay, in any one of the following cases. Any deposition may be used by any party for the purpose of contradicting or impeaching the testimony of the deponent as a witness. So, if you took the your opponents or the opposing party, okay, the deposition of the opposing party, you may use it once that person has took the witness stand. Okay, you may use his deposition for the purpose of contradicting or impeaching his testimony. Okay, and also the deposition of a party or anyone who at the time of the taking of the deposition was an officer, director, or managing agent of a public or private corporation, partnership, which is a party may be used by an adverse party for any purpose. Okay, and also in the following cases, deposition may be used. The deposition of a witness, whether or not a party, may be used by any party if the court finds that the witness is dead. So in such a case, it is for the purpose of perpetuating the testimony of the witness that the witness resides at a distance more than 100 kilometers from the place of trial or is out of the Philippines, unless it appears that his absence was procured by the party offering the deposition, that the witness is unable to attend or testify because of age, sickness, infirmity, or imprisonment, that the party offering the deposition has been unable to procure the attendance of the witness by subpoena, and upon such other exceptional circumstances. So in these cases, okay, the witness, the testimony of the witness may be taken by deposition and it may be used by a party as evidence during the trial. Okay. So you may ask, why is it that if a witness resides at a distance of more than 100 kilometers, his testimony may be taken by way of deposition. Because in civil cases, if the witness is residing more than 100 kilometers from the place of trial, even if the court issues a subpoena, the court cannot compel that witness to attend. There is no compulsory process because he resides more than 100 kilometers from the place of trial. So instead of issuing a subpoena and compelling him to attend the trial in court, his deposition may instead be taken. Okay, and introduced later as evidence during the trial. Okay, the same thing is true with respect to other factors which may affect the capability of the witness to attend trial in open court, such as sickness, infirmity, imprisonment. But as I've said later, in cases of persons who are confined in prison, you have to ask for leave of court, ask for approval of the court, okay, before he can be compelled to attend or to be placed on deposition. Okay, how to apply? We have already discussed it earlier. As a general rule, okay, for a person to be placed on deposition, you have to file an ex parte motion, except when, in cases when person is confined in prison, you have to first seek the approval of the court. Okay, the applicant for deposition taking will serve notice to all the parties stating the time and place of the deposition and the name of the deponent. So even if it is ex parte, you have to serve notice of the taking of the deposition to your opponent and to the opponent party's counsel. Okay, informing them when and where the deposition will be held. If the applicant fails to attend and other parties attended, the court may order the applicant to pay the reasonable expenses of the other parties who attended. Okay. Objections and the effect of taking and using the deposition. Okay, can you object to the taking of the deposition? The answer is yes. Objections may be made at the trial or hearing to receiving in evidence any deposition or part thereof for any reason which would require the exclusion of evidence if the witness were present in court. Okay. A party shall not be deemed to make a person his witness for any purpose by taking his deposition. That is why I told you earlier that taking of deposition is different from use of deposition. It does not mean that if you took the deposition of a person, it automatically makes him your witness. Okay, because deposition is a fact-finding method. If you know that the testimony of the said witness during the deposition will only damage your case, you will no longer you are in the you have an option not to use it as evidence during the trial. Okay? Because you're given the option to introduce all or part of the deposition as your evidence. Except, of course, when the other party objects and the court required you to introduce all or portion of the deposition, okay, that is relevant to the part which you used. Okay. So the effect of using the deposition, the introduction in evidence of the deposition or any part thereof for any purpose other than that of contradicting or impeaching the deponent, makes the deponent the witness of the party introducing the deposition. So if you use the deposition, that is only the time when you make the testimony of the witness on deposition as your own evidence. Substitution of parties. Substitution of parties does not affect the right to use depositions previously taken. All depositions lawfully taken and duly filed in the former action may be used in the latter as if originally taken. Okay? At the trial, any party may rebut any relevant evidence contained in a deposition, whether introduced by him or by any other party. Now, who are the persons who are authorized to take depositions? The answer to this question will depend on where the deposition is held. If it is held in the Philippines, depositions may be taken by a judge, notary public, or any person who is authorized to administer oath under Section 14. Okay. However, if the deposition is held in a foreign country, okay, depositions may be taken before the secretary of the embassy or legation, consul general, consul vice consul, or consular agent of the republic, before such officers that who are appointed under commissions or letters rogatory. What is the manner of taking deposition? Okay, the officer who presides in the deposition taking shall place the witness under oath. So it is just like proceeding in open court wherein the witness or the deponent will be placed under oath. Okay, and the testimony of the witness will be recorded through stenography or shorthand. Okay. Now, what is a commission and what is a letters rogatory? Commission is an instrument issued by a court addressed to a non-judicial foreign officer, authorizing him to take deposition. So with respect to consuls, vice consuls, secretary of the embassy, you issue a commission, okay, which clothes the non-judicial officer with the authority to take deposition. On the other hand, letters rogatory is an instrument sent in the name of the judge addressed to appropriate judicial authority in the foreign country, informing the latter of the case and the name of the witness and requesting him to take the deposition of the said witness. So the person who will take the deposition is a judicial officer of a foreign country. Okay, unlike in commission, it is a non-judicial officer in a foreign country. Okay? Now, with respect to persons who are authorized to take depositions, there are certain disqualifications. What are those disqualifications? If the person taking the deposition is a relative within the 6th degree of consanguinity or affinity, he is an employee or counsel of any of the parties. He is a relative within the same degree or employee of the said counsel, and he is one who is financially interested in the action. So if any of these disqualifications exist, then it is the job of the opposing party to contest or to make an objection on the qualifications of the officer taking the deposition before the said deposition is taken. Now, objections should be made at the time of the examination and shall be noted by the officer taking the deposition with respect to the qualification of the officer taking the deposition, the manner of taking it, the evidence presented, the conduct of any party, and any other objection to the proceedings. Examination of the deponent. Even if the deposition is taken in a foreign country, the adverse party cannot claim that he was deprived of the opportunity to cross-examine because written interrogatories may be available. The deponent may be examined on anything which is not privileged. And the court may also order that only those who are parties as well as their counsels should be present in the deposition taking. What is the scope of the examination? Again, the deponent may be examined on any matter which is relevant to the subject of the pending action except with respect to privilege matters. It may cover those relating to the claim or defense of the parties, including the existence, description, nature, custody, condition, and location of books, documents, and other tangible things, as well as the identity of persons having knowledge of relevant facts. The court may also order that only the parties and the deponent shall be present. Okay. What are the allowable motions? Okay, the following are allowable motions. The deposition shall not be taken. The deposition should be taken at another place. The deposition should be taken through written interrogatories. Certain matters shall not be inquired into. Only the parties and officers shall be present. Secret processes need not be disclosed. The parties shall submit specified documents in sealed envelopes. And a motion to terminate or limit the examination on the ground that the examination was conducted in bad faith or to annoy or harass the deponent. So after the deposition has been taken, okay, it will be transcribed. And after transcription, it will be given to the witness for his examination. Okay, if there are corrections or changes, okay, then it should be manifested. Okay, the deposit, and then after the witness is fully satisfied that the transcription is correct, then he shall sign the deposition. If it is not signed, the officer will sign it and record the reason for the refusal of the witness to sign. The deposition shall be sealed, and the officer will certify that the deposition was sworn to be for him and that it is a true record of the proceedings. Again, we now go to the seminal case of People versus Serio. So in this case, the Supreme Court categorically ruled that depositions under Rule 23 may be applied supletorily in criminal proceedings so long as there is a compelling reason. Okay, you must remember that we have previously discussed that depositions may be used in exceptional circumstances. And this is one of those exceptional circumstances because in this case, the deponent cannot testify personally in court because he is in prison in a foreign land. Okay, so he cannot leave the facility where she is confined, which constituted the compelling reason why the Supreme Court allowed the use of depositions in civil cases under Rule 23 to be applied in a suppletory manner to criminal proceedings. Okay, the terms laid down by the trial court ensured that they are given ample opportunity to cross-examine through written interrogatories so as not to defeat the purpose of the constitutional right of the accused. Okay, the case of People versus Webb. In this case, respondent Webb was charged with rape with homicide. His defense was alibi, that he was in the United States at the time of the offense alluded to. Now, in order to prove his alibi, Webb filed a motion to take the testimony by oral deposition of U.S. immigration officials. Okay, it was opposed because according to the prosecution, deposition has no application to criminal cases. Now, the trial court was but exercising its judgment on what it perceived to be a superfluous exercise on the belief that the introduction will not add to the persuasiveness of evidence that is already on record. Okay, the important thing to remember with respect to the case of People versus Webb is that the motion to take depositions, the motion to use depositions is addressed to the sound discretion of the court. The court may allow it, the court may deny it using its sound discretion. So in the case of Well, the trial court denied the application to take the oral deposition of certain U.S. immigration officials because according to the trial court, it will not add, okay, to it is merely corroborative. If it is allowed, okay, the deposition was taken, it will only be mere corroborative of the evidence which is already on record. Okay, it will not add to the persuasiveness of evidence already at hand. The use of discovery procedures is directed to the sound discretion of the trial judge. The deposition taking cannot be based, nor it can be denied on flimsy reasons. Discretion has to be exercised in a reasonable manner and in consonance with the spirit of the law. The trial judge committed no grave abuse of discretion if she decided that the evidence sought to be proved is not substantial to the evidence which is already at hand. Okay, so it is within the discretion of the trial judge whether to grant or to deny the deposition taking. Okay, we have the case of Beran versus Court of Appeals. Okay, so this is a case to recover possession of a parcel of land. Now, the defendant offered as part of her evidence the deposition of Clodovesa, but it was denied admission. Okay, on the ground that the notice of the deposition taking was not received. On the ground that no proof was submitted to show that the witness was so old and would not be able to come to court to testify. However, it was the one introducing the deposition commented that the notice of the deposition taking was received well before the intended date, and that although petitioners filed an opposition, this was not acted upon by the trial court before the taking of the deposition. Okay, so is it necessary for the trial court to rule on the opposition to taking the deposition, okay, before the other party could be compelled to attend the deposition taking? Okay. Leave of court for taking deposition should be distinguished from the approval of the court for the use of the deposition. With regard to the use, there is occasion for the court to exercise discretion at the time when it is formally offered in evidence. In this case, the trial court did not admit the deposition when it was formally offered on the ground that petitioners were denied their right to cross-examine the deponent. The counsel of the plaintiffs was notified sufficiently in advance of the deposition taking. If he failed to appear on that day, as he could have done if he exerted diligent efforts, he did so at his own risk. Remember, class, that deposition taking is made ex parte. So meaning, there is no room for the court to exercise its discretion. It is only in the use of the deposition that the court exercises discretion on whether or not to allow it. Okay, but with respect to the taking of deposition, since it is a fact-finding method, since it is a mode of discovery, it is made ex parte without seeking approval from the court. The only thing which is required is notice to the other party. So if there is notice to the other party, they were duly notified and they did not attend the deposition taking, the deposition may proceed ex parte because they were sufficiently notified and they cannot later invoke that they were denied the opportunity to cross-examine when the said deposition is being introduced later as evidence. Martires versus Somera. So in this case, Somera filed an action reivindigatoria against Gauna. Somera filed a motion to conduct deposition upon oral examination in New York. Now, the trial court granted Somera's motion. However, he received a manifestation after the deposition was already over. Although petitioner questions the taking of depositions on the ground of lack of reasonable notice or writing, the trial court did not commit any error in allowing Somera to take her deposition and those of her witnesses, and in subsequently admitting the same in evidence. While it is true that Avelina's motion indicated that the deposition taking was initially scheduled in July 2007 and the proceedings was actually conducted on September 2007, it could not be said that petitioner was caught off guard by the belated conduct of the deposition. It was shown that during the hearing in September 3, 2007, petitioner was sufficiently informed that the deposition would be taken on September 27. Deposition discovery rules are to be accorded a broad and liberal treatment and should not be unduly restricted if the matters inquired into are relevant and not privileged. Fortune Corporation versus CA. So in this case, this is an action for breach of contract filed by Fortune against Intermerchants. Fortune served written interrogatories, which was answered by the chairman of the board of Intermerchants. Subsequently, Fortune served a notice to take deposition upon oral examination. So the first was through written interrogatories, and then after Fortune obtained the answer to the interrogatories, he again filed a motion to take deposition upon oral examination. So it was opposed by Intermerchants on the ground that petitioner has previously availed of one mode of discovery and that it would cause annoyance to the witness who is ready to testify in court. So is there a limit to the availment of modes of discovery? Does the fact that you already availed of one mode of discovery prevent you from later on filing another mode of discovery? This is the question or issue that is resolved in the case of Fortune. Okay? The discretion conferred by law is not unlimited, that it must be exercised not arbitrarily, capriciously, or oppressively, but in a reasonable manner in consonance with the spirit of the law, to the end that its purpose may be obtained. Okay, what are the limitations to the taking of deposition? If the deposition is only intended, conducted in bad faith or in such a manner as to annoy, embarrass, or oppress the deponent, and the matter subject of the inquiry is no longer relevant to the case or is a privileged matter. Section 16 of Rule 24 states that it is only upon notice and for good cause shown that the court may order that the deposition shall not be taken. The matter of good cause is to be determined by the court in the exercise of judicial discretion. Good cause means substantial reason. In this case, intermerchants fail to sufficiently establish that there is a good cause to support that the deposition shall not be taken. The fact that petitioner had previously availed of the mode of discovery, which is by written interrogatories, is not a valid objection to the taking of a deposition where there is no duplication and the examining party is not acting in bad faith. So there is no limit. Even if you already availed of a previous mode of discovery by written interrogatory and then later on you want to avail of another mode of discovery through oral deposition, that is allowed provided that there is no duplication and the examining party is not acting in bad faith. The fact that a party has resorted to a particular method of discovery will not bar subsequent use of other discovery devices, as long as the party is not attempting to circumvent a ruling of the court or to harass or oppress the other party. Interrogatories may well be used as a preliminary to the taking of depositions in order to ascertain what individuals have the information. So, availability of the proposed deponent to testify in court does not constitute good cause to justify the court's order that his deposition shall not be taken. The mere fact that the court could not observe the behavior of the deponent does not justify the denial of the right to take deposition. The allegation that petitioner merely intended to annoy, harass, or oppress the proposed deponent cannot support the setting aside of a notice to take deposition. So the mere availability of a witness to testify in court will not justify the denial of the deposition taking. Why? Because deposition is a fact-finding method. Okay, it is a mode of discovery to prevent surprises during the trial. So, in order for the other party to know the case of his opponent, okay, this method of deposition can be availed of to provide to avoid surprises during the trial. So, the mere fact that the other party will say, the witness is ready and able to testify in court, that is not a valid objection to the taking of deposition because the purpose of the deposition is for the other party to know the opposing party's case. Okay, so if that is the case, then it should be taken ahead of the time when that witness is presented during the trial. Depositions upon written interrogatories. Okay. So as opposed to deposition upon oral examination. Okay, so the party applying to take the deposition of any person through written interrogatory, stating the name of the deponent and the officer taking the deposition shall furnish the following. The party served with direct written interrogatories may serve cross interrogatories within 10 calendar days from service. Redirect interrogatory shall be served within 5 calendar days from receipt of the cross. Now, objections to written interrogatories must be made before taking of deposition begins or as soon as disqualification becomes known, otherwise they are deemed made. Objections to the competency of a witness or the competency or materiality of the testimony are not waived by failure to make them before or during the taking of the deposition unless the ground of objection is one which might be obviated if presented at that time. Okay, depositions before action. Can you file a motion to take a deposition even before the case is filed? The answer is yes. If your purpose is to perpetuate the testimony of a witness. This happens if, for example, you are still on the case build-up. Okay? You do not have all the evidence that is required to prove your cause of action. You are still building up your case. But you have a material witness that is already of advanced age. And this witness might die even before the case is filed. So what do? You cannot file the case because you do not have sufficient evidence to support your cause of action. Okay? And the witness is already of advanced age. So you file a deposition before action for the purpose of perpetuating the testimony of that witness. Okay. How do you do this? You file a verified petition, okay, to perpetuate, to take a deposition before action for the purpose of perpetuating the testimony of the witness. Where do you file it? In the court of the place of residence of any expected adverse party. Okay? So you file it in the court, the competent court. So the RTC, since this is an action incapable of pecuniary estimation, you file it in the RTC of the place of residence of any expected adverse party. Now, what are the contents of the petition? That you are expecting to bring a case, but you are unable to bring it, okay, at present. The subject matter of the expected action, the facts desired to be established, and the reason why you want to perpetuate the evidence, the names and addresses of expected adverse parties, the names and addresses of persons to be examined, and the substance of their testimonies, and plea for an order authorizing the petitioner to take the deposition. Okay. Procedure for taking deposition pending action. Okay, the petitioner will notify all the adverse parties of the date, time, and place of the deposition taking. The court shall notify the parties and the prospective deponent at least 20 calendar days before the date of the hearing. If the court is satisfied that perpetuation of testimony will prevent failure or delay of justice, it shall order the taking of the deposition pending action, specifying the deponent, subject of the examination, manner of taking, whether oral or written. And the deposition may be used in any action involving the same subject matter. Now we go to depositions pending appeal. So, previously, we discussed depositions before action, depositions pending action. Now we go to depositions pending appeal. Okay. What is the time when depositions pending appeal may be taken? After an appeal has been taken from the judgment of the trial court, before taking an appeal if time to file has not yet prescribed. Okay? So once there is already a judgment issued by the trial court and there is a 15-day period to file an appeal, that is the window by which depositions pending appeal may be taken, or after an appeal has already been taken from judgment of the trial. Okay. It may be taken by the court which rendered the judgment for the purpose of perpetuating the testimony of the witness for use in further proceedings. So the court which rendered the judgment is the one who will take the deposition for the purpose of further proceedings on appeal. Motion for leave of court to take depositions pending appeal must be filed, stating the name, address of the deponent, substance of the testimony, and reason for perpetuation. The court will grant the motion if it finds that it is proper to avoid failure or delay of justice. Interrogatories to parties. Okay. Written interrogatories are used to elicit material and relevant facts. Okay, how do you apply for written interrogatories? By filing an ex parte motion attaching the written interrogatories. Okay, and it will relate to any matter that is relevant to the pending case and can be the subject of a deposition. It shall be answered in writing within 15 calendar days from service. Now, what is the effect if, for example, the opponent fails to answer the written interrogatories? The court may, on motion, strike out all or any part of the pleading of that party who refused to answer, or dismiss the action, or enter a judgment by default against that party, or order payment of reasonable expenses. Now, the choice of penalty or sanction is dependent on the sound discretion. Objections and use of written interrogatories. If there are objections to the written interrogatories, it must be submitted to the court within 10 calendar days from service. Okay, the filing of the answer to the WI is deferred until objections are resolved by the court. Only one set of written interrogatories may be filed. Beyond that, leave of court is required. Okay, party who is not served with written interrogatories may not be compelled by the adverse party to give testimony or to give a deposition unless allowed by the court for good reasons and to prevent failure of justice. We have the case of Apuluhencia versus Metrobank. So this is a case for nullification mortgage filed by Apuluhencia against Metrobank. Now, after the filing, the pleadings, and the pre-trial, Apuluhencia filed a motion for the issuance of a subpoena, okay, to require Metrobank's officers to appear and testify as his witnesses. Okay, so he wanted the witnesses, the officers of the defendant, Metrobank, to testify in his behalf. So he requested for the issuance of a subpoena. Okay. The Supreme Court said, as a rule in civil cases, the procedure of calling the adverse party to the witness stand is not allowed unless written interrogatories are first served upon them. The purposes of a party not served with written interrogatories may not be compelled by the adverse party to give testimony in open court or to give a deposition pending appeal. Okay, the purpose of that rule is to prevent a fishing expedition. It is there to maintain order and facilitate the conduct of the trial. The process could be treated as a fishing expedition or an attempt at delaying the proceedings. It produces no significant result that a prior written interrogatories might bring. Okay. Compelling the adverse party to take the witness stand may result in the calling party damaging its own case. If a party cannot elicit facts or information useful to its case through the facility of written interrogatories or other modes of discovery, then the calling of the adverse party to the witness stand could only serve to weaken its own case. Okay. You must remember that you have to establish your cause of action through your own witnesses. You do not use the adverse party to be your witness unless, of course, you have first availed of the modes of discovery. Because once you have availed of the modes of discovery, you will have or gain knowledge of the other party's case. Now, if you have already gained knowledge of the other party's case, then you will know, okay, the case of the adverse party, the testimonies of the adverse party that is useful to your own case. So because if you will use the witnesses of the adverse party as your own witnesses, it would only, without first availing of the modes of discovery, it will only weaken your case, or it will only be a fishing expedition because you still don't know what that other party would say when you introduce him as a witness to support your case. That is the reason why there is a need first to avail of the modes of discovery. It prevents the calling party from conducting a fishing expedition or bungling its own case. What petitioners seek goes against the very principles of justice and fair play. They would want that Metrobank provide the very evidence with which to prosecute and build their case from the start. This they may not be allowed. Okay, PhilHealth versus Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital. PhilHealth filed a complaint for administrative offense of filing multiple claims against Our Lady of Lourdes. Now, pending the answer of the PhilHealth president and CEO to the written interrogatories, as well as the inspection and copying of the transmittal letter, these modes of discovery were availed of because its representatives were denied and were not given access to documents. So they were saying, Our Lady of Lourdes were saying that they were denied access to certain documents. They were not allowed to talk to certain PhilHealth personnel with regard to the charge. So the arbiter denied the availment of written interrogatories. The arbiter may exercise his sound discretion on whether to resort to modes of discovery. The purpose of written discoveries is to assist the parties in clarifying the issues and in ascertaining the facts involved in the case. The provision on production and inspection of documents is to enable not only the parties but also the court to discover all the relevant and material facts in connection with the case pending before it. The questions contained in the written interrogatories sought to elicit facts that could already be seen from the allegations as well as the attachments in the complaint as well as the answer. The interrogatories were frivolous and need not be answered. We likewise find as self-serving the allegation of Our Lady of Lourdes that its representatives were denied access to certain documents. No iota of evidence, documentary or testimonial was submitted to substantiate this convenient excuse. So again, availment of the mode of discovery was denied because the answer to the written interrogatories can be found already in the complaint. Okay, so when you avail of the mode of discovery, you use it as a fact-finding tool to answer, okay, certain questions that are not in the complaint. Okay, because the complaint alleges only ultimate facts. And if these facts can already be found in the complaint, okay, then there is no more need to resort to the modes of discovery. Producers Bank versus Court of Appeals. Okay. State Investment House filed a complaint for sum of money against Producers Bank. During the presentation of the rebuttal evidence, State Investment served written interrogatories to producers. Okay. Now, producers filed a motion to quash on the ground that since the trial was about to be terminated, remember, the stage when the written interrogatories were served was during the presentation of rebuttal evidence, meaning plaintiffs and defendants have already presented their respective evidences. Now, the issue is whether the court was correct in allowing the admission of written interrogatories filed by state investment at the rebuttal stage of the proceedings. So, it's very important, when should written interrogatories be availed of? Should it be before pre-trial? Should it be during the trial stage before judgment? The Supreme Court said Section 1, Rule 23 does not provide any time frame within which the modes of discovery can be utilized, other than by stating that the same should be availed of with leave of court after jurisdiction has been obtained over the defendant, or without such leave after an answer has been served. The written interrogatories served by state investment upon producers relate to the factual and principal issues in dispute. The rebuttal evidence still to be presented by state investment can be circumscribed, thereby expediting the disposition of the case. This court finds no grave abuse of discretion on the part of the trial court in allowing the written interrogatories to be served by state investment. So the important thing to remember in this case of producers is that the modes of discovery can be availed of during the trial stage before judgment. So even at the rebuttal stage of the proceedings, the application for written interrogatories was allowed. Why? Because it is a fact-finding method, in which, facts that were obtained during the deposition upon written interrogatories may actually expedite the trial. So, there might be no need anymore to present rebuttal evidence when that written interrogatory is taken. Another case, Insular Life versus Porto Hopkins. Rucal filed a complaint to recover the proceeds of the life insurance policy of his brother. Now, Insular sent Rucal a request for admission along with a set of written interrogatories. So, two modes of discovery, request for admission as well as written interrogatories. It was granted by the trial court. However, Rucal failed to answer the written interrogatories despite the court's directive. The trial court, however, did not dismiss the case, but decided the case on the merits despite the failure to answer the written interrogatories. The Supreme Court said the matter of how and when the sanction should be applied is one that primarily rests on the sound discretion of the court where the case stands, having always in mind the paramount and overriding interests of justice. Remember that one of the sanctions for failure to answer a request for admission is dismissal of the case. But along with dismissal of the case, there are other sanctions that can be applied by the trial court as a penalty for the failure to answer the request for admission or the written interrogatory. Now, the choice of what sanction should be applied rests on the court's sound discretion. So if the trial court did not dismiss the case, for failure to answer the request for admission, then as long as that discretion is not abused, it will not be disturbed. The discovery methods do not deserve to be taken lightly. These discovery rules can contribute in no small measure to the simplification of issues and in hastening the disposition of cases. The various modes of discovery are meant to serve as a device, along with the pre-trial, to narrow and clarify the issues, to ascertain the facts relative to those issues. It is to enable the parties to obtain the fullest possible knowledge of the issues and the facts before civil trials and thus prevent the said trials to be carried on in the dark. We have the case of De La Torre versus Pepsi Cola. Okay, in this case, the petitioners are holders of soft drink bottle cups bearing the number 349, allegedly the winning digit in a contest which was sponsored by Pepsi. Now, Pepsi sent written interrogatories to petitioners consisting of several questions aimed at determining whether or not they are eligible to litigate as paupers. Now, the petitioners did not answer the written interrogatory. So Pepsi filed a motion to dismiss because one of the consequences of failure to answer requests for written interrogatories is dismissal of the case. Now, this was granted by the trial court, so the case was dismissed. However, the Supreme Court said, we think that the trial court was rather precipitate in dismissing the complaint of petitioners against Pepsi. The written interrogatory served by Pepsi on petitioners dealt with ancillary matters not directly related to the main issues in the suit. Diba? What should be the topic of the interrogatories, written interrogatories? It should be on issues which is relevant to the case. So in this case, they dealt with ancillary matters referring to their eligibility to litigate as paupers. Okay. The written interrogatories were for the purpose of finding out if the latter were entitled to litigate as paupers. That is, whether they should be exempted from payment of docket fees. There is no showing that petitioners were guilty of defying or disregarding any court order to answer the written interrogatories of Pepsi in order to delay the proceedings. Now we move to admission by adverse party. So request for admission. Tapos na tayo sa depositions, pending actions, depositions, before action, depositions upon written interrogatories, depositions pending appeal. Now we go to request for admission. So at any time after issues are joined, meaning after filing of the answer, a party may file a written request for admission by the adverse party on the following matters: genuineness of any material and relevant documents stated in the request, copies of the document should be attached, and the truth of any material and relevant matter of fact set forth in the request. So meaning after an answer has been filed, issues having been joined, you can file a request for admission of the genuineness and genuineness of any material and relevant documents, so documentary, or material and relevant fact. Okay? Although this could be addressed also during the pre-trial proceedings wherein the parties can stipulate as to certain material and relevant facts as well as documents. But again, this is another option that is given by the rule. So in addition to the stipulation of facts and documents during the pre-trial, you can also avail of a written request for admission by the adverse party. So the party served with the request must answer within 15 calendar days after service. Compliance shall be in the form of a sworn statement specifically denying the matters inquired into and stating the reasons why he cannot admit or deny the same. If a party already controverted matter, subject of the request in a previous pleading, he cannot be compelled to admit or deny them And if, for example, okay, the adverse party has already filed a reply denying, okay, the genuineness and due execution of a certain document, you cannot again file a request for admission later on. Okay, because it will only be a superfluity. Okay. If a party served a sworn denial of the genuineness of the and due execution, which was later proved to be genuine and true, the court upon application may order payment of reasonable expenses and attorney's fees. Failure to submit compliance may cause the matters subject of the request for admission to be deemed admitted. So if you fail to answer a request for admission, the effect of which is it will be considered as deemed admitted. Any admission made by a party is only for the purpose of the pending proceeding only. So unlike depositions, in request for admission of the adverse party, it is only for the purpose of the pending action. Okay, it cannot be used in other actions. Okay, people versus act is a request for admission by the adverse party applicable to criminal proceedings. Okay, whether a request for admission under Rule 26 is applicable in criminal proceedings. Okay, you must remember that one of the rights of the accused is against self-incrimination. This right prescribes the use of physical or moral compulsion to extort communications from the accused. This is because the failure to answer a request for admission will be deemed as an admission of the fact requested to be admitted. So it requires the party requested to file a sworn statement, thereby exposing him to the additional peril of perjury. Such requirements unduly pressure the accused in making an admission or denial, which in itself is a form of compulsion. The refusal of the accused to answer the request for admission may later be taken against him. So request for admission, the adverse party, is not applicable to criminal proceedings because it would violate his right against self-incrimination. But in this case, the one who filed the request for admission is the accused himself. Would that be constitute a waiver of his right? Okay. The Supreme Court said request for admission under Rule 26 again is not applicable to criminal proceedings. There are inherent limitations in availing of Rule 26 as a mode of discovery, taking into account the constitutional rights of the accused against self-incrimination. But in this case, it was the accused who filed a request for admission. It was not initiated by the prosecution. Thus, it may be argued that there is no violation because it was the accused who requested for admission. Okay. So, however, the Supreme Court said almost all of the paragraphs are worded in the negative, with the end goal of showing that Ang has no participation or complicity in the crime. These matters cannot be the subject of an admission by the prosecution but must be duly proven by Ang as a matter of defense in the trial. If the court allows the implied admissions regarded also as judicial admissions by the trial court, then it will have the effect of closing the case for the prosecution. The inescapable conclusion would be the acquittal of the accused even before trial has been. We have the case of Lanada versus Court of Appeals. So in this case, Jimenez filed a complaint for damages against Nestle for the death of her son during a strike in Nestle. Now, Jimenez served the defendants a request for admission of the truth of the facts set forth in the complaint and the genuineness of the documents appended thereto. Now, Nestle filed their answer to the request for admission through their counsel. Now, Jimenez contended that it is the parties themselves and not their counsel that should personally answer the request for admission. So the issue is, should a person to whom a request for admission is addressed personally answer the request? Okay. It should not be restrictively construed to mean that a party may not engage the services of counsel to make the response in his behalf. There is no reason to strictly construe the phrase "the party to whom the request is directed" to refer solely to the petitioners themselves. The subject matter of the request are the same as the ultimate facts alleged in the complaint, for which private respondents have filed their respective answers. Private respondents thus desired the petitioners to admit once again the very matters they had dealt with in their respective answers. If the request for admission only serves to delay the proceedings by abetting redundancy in the pleadings, the intended purpose for the rule will be defeated. Section 1 of Rule 26 requires that the request for admission must be served directly upon the party requested. It is thus unfair and unreasonable for private respondents to expect the petitioners to answer the request that they in fact, did not personally receive. So, the moral of the story in Lanada is that the answer to the request for admission will not be made personally by the persons to whom it is addressed. It may be made through counsel. Then second, the topic or the questions that are propounded in the request for admission must be one that should not be found in the answer itself. Because if it is, then the purpose of the request for admission as an additional mode of discovery would be defeated. And also there is a need to serve personally the request for admission to the person to whom the request is addressed. Production or inspection of documents or things is another mode of discovery. Upon motion, with good cause shown, the court may order the production and inspection, copying, photographing of any document, paper, books, accounts, letters, photographs, or things not privileged, which contain evidence material to the action and which are in his possession, custody, or control. The order shall specify the time, place, and manner of making the inspection of or taking of copies and the terms and conditions thereof. Now, the failure to comply will result in the issuance of an order stating that the character of the land or the contents of the paper shall be in accordance with the claim of the movement. Okay, we have the case of CIR versus San Miguel. Okay, this is a case filed by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue against San Miguel for violation of the tax code. Now, after the CTA division has rendered judgment, the Commissioner filed a motion for production of documents, praying that San Miguel be compelled to produce certain documents and videos. Now, the issue is whether a motion for production of documents and objects may be availed of after the court has already rendered judgment. Okay. Since this mode of discovery must be availed of before trial, Rule 27, Section 1 does not provide when the motion may be used. Hence, the allowance of a motion for production rests on the sound discretion of the court. A motion for production of documents may be availed of even beyond the pre-trial stage upon showing of a good cause. We allowed the production of documents because the petitioner was able to show good cause and relevance of the documents sought to be produced, and the trial court has not yet rendered its judgment. So, however, in this case, the petitioner filed its motion after the CTA division has already rendered judgment. There was indeed no further need for the production of documents and objects desired by the petitioner. On the contrary, the production of those documents after judgment defeats the very purpose of modes of discovery in expediting the case, preparation, and shortening of trials. The last mode of discovery is physical and mental examination of persons. In an action in which the mental or physical condition of a party is in controversy, the court, upon motion showing good cause and notice to the party to be examined, may order the party to submit to physical, mental examination by a physician. The court shall specify the time, place, and manner and scope of examination and the person to conduct the examination. Failure to comply with the said order shall result in the issuance of an order stating that the mental and physical condition of a party shall be in accordance with the claim of the movement. Okay, an example of this would be a petition for the probate of a will. Okay, if it is filed by the testator himself, and there are persons opposing the probate on the ground of the saneness or the physical or mental condition of the person, of the testator himself, then you can file a mode of discovery for the physical and mental examination of the said person. Okay. Refusal to comply with the modes of discovery. If the deponent refuses to answer a question on oral examination or written interrogatory, the proponent may apply for an order to compel answer. If granted, the deponent shall be required to answer. If the refusal was without substantial justification, it may constitute contempt of court in the issuance of an order that the matter shall be taken to be established according to the claim of the movant. If the application is denied, then the court may require the movant to pay reasonable expenses incurred by the deponent, including attorney's fees. So that's all for modes of discovery. Thank you for listening.